Continuing with Health Watch now, 7 women in one family had major surgery after genetic tests showed them at an elevated risk for cancer. But then years later, they were told those tests had been wrong. And one mother says that the surgeries left her unable to have more children. Jamie Yuccas joins us now from Los Angeles with more on this. Boy, Jamie, you know, as we continue to there are more and more tests that kind of like tap into our genetic makeup to predict our health future. And we're beginning to increasingly depend on them. And so to hear that there's a possibility that a test that many, many women depend on might not be entirely accurate is so scary.
It's scary and it's shocking, Anne-Marie. Genetic testing, though, is a critical part of assessing those cancer risks, as you talked about. It's also an evolving science, and as more people get tested and the technology improves, so do the results. Unfortunately, though, in this case, the science evolved a few years too late.
The results said I was positive. It was very alarming.
Katie Mathis was in her early 30s, married with a young son, when she decided to take a genetic test to check her risk for cancer. Shortly after, she learned she had a mutation on a BRCA gene, which significantly raises a person's risk of developing breast or ovarian cancer. After struggling over what to do, she underwent surgery to remove her ovaries, fallopian tubes, and had a double mastectomy.
Did this end up changing your life?
Absolutely. During the entire recovery process, it was 9 months before I was cleared to pick up my child. I wasn't able to do bath time with him. I wasn't able to make dinner for him. I wasn't able to pick him up or hug him for a very long time.
Her mother, sister, cousins, and aunts all got tested too. 11 had the mutation. 7 had surgery. But 4 years later, Myriad Genetics, which did the test, told her and her family their risk assessment had changed.
I went from very high risk, 84%, to nothing. It really felt like I was doing something for my family. I needed to do these surgeries to save them. And then just the reality that I didn't need to do any of that was really heavy.
Myriad says such reclassifications are extremely rare, and as the science evolves, we scrutinize any new information, and reclassifications are made only after very careful consideration.
This is a changing dynamic field where we're learning something every day.
CBS News medical consultant Dr. David Yuccas says as more people take genetic tests, the results are improving.
Right now, we've tested hundreds of thousands of people with this BRCA test. Every person that's tested, and we then follow the outcome, the database gets stronger and we have more information.
Though reclassifications are uncommon, Mathis says for her, the impact is everlasting.
I removed body parts and I can't have children anymore because of this. I just don't feel like myself. And the weight of that it's a really big burden. And what do I do each day? I have to get up and keep going. You know, I'm a mom and a wife and a teacher. So you just keep going.
Dr. Yuccas says at-risk patients should get this genetic test, though. He recommends going to a National Cancer Institute designated center where counselors can answer your questions.
Okay, so high-risk patients should get the test, but how do you know if you're high risk if you don't get the test?
Well, so the interesting part of this, Anne-Marie, is if you think about it, in this case, Katie's mother had breast cancer. So at her doctor's appointment, she brought that up, told the doctor the age that her mother had the breast cancer, and that her great-grandmother had also had breast cancer. So in that instance, the doctor said, okay, we should go ahead and do this genetic test. Now, unfortunately, what happened back when she took the test 4 years ago is that when her information got entered into the database, and as we've talked about some of her other family members, it looked like there was a gene mutation because of the variant within their family. So their database itself, in terms of the entire database, her variant was just about, I think it was a little less than 30 people who had the same variant that she did. And so it came up that there was a problem. Now that number is much, much higher. So as Dr. Yuccas explained, and as Katie actually talked to me about, she would have asked more questions. It wouldn't have changed the test at the time, but she could have asked how many people have this variant, how many people are in the database at this point in time that have the same type of genetic makeup that I do, so that there would be more information for her to go ahead and make a decision. Because as she said, she went from an 84% chance of developing these cancers to now none. So
Whoa.
that's obviously a very large gap, of course. And Dr. Yuccas says that that's what's going to happen. Is we've talked about in the past with some of these genetic testing. Some people do them for fun, right? They go ahead and they do 23andMe. They want to learn about their ancestry and that type of thing. It's the same thing that we've seen with those, that as the database gets larger, a lot of times you're contacted later and told, oh, you know, we thought you were Irish, but now it turns out you're also Welsh.
Yes.
You know, and that type of thing. So that's what we're looking at. These tests are still relatively new. And as more and more information is collected, the information can change.
Yeah, and you know, you talked about it being an evolving science. If there's anything that I've learned from at least a little bit that I've read about the way genetics work, is that, you know, there may be a gene that's sort of an on switch for something, but there may be two genes that you have that are off switches for the same thing, and it's not the clear snapshot that we always thought it would be. Though the BRCA gene has really kind of changed the game in many, many ways for many people. How is Katie doing?
Well, you know, the interesting part in talking to Katie is that I think she has a great attitude. She's a very optimistic, positive person when you talk to her. But this has really, really impacted her life. I mean, as you can imagine, and I can imagine, she had her ovaries taken out. She couldn't have a second child. She and her husband had planned on having more children. She had the double mastectomy. With those types of major surgeries, she's also on hormone replacement. She's now concerned that the $100 a month that her insurance is paying for her to be on hormone replacement could end up going away because the classification is now different. She did not, you know, she's now not at risk for developing those cancers, even though she's now had the surgery thinking she was at risk. In terms of, you know, when they go ahead and do reconstructive surgery too, when you talk about things like implants, she told me, you know, I'm looking at having to have these implants probably removed and replaced within 10 or 15 years. Is insurance going to pay for that? So there's now a lot of questions now that the classification has changed, that we really don't know how the insurance companies will go ahead and handle it, since the information has now changed and is new.
Yeah, the domino effect has been transformative, not in a great way. Jamie, thank you so much.
Yep.